doesn't. She waits, and David says, what would you? I mean, why wouldn't he say that to his wife? It's his wife. It's the one he loves. I mean, of all the wives, this is the one that he loves the most. This is the one who's, the one we know most about, really. I mean, this lady and Abigail are the two women that we have stories about in the book of Samuel. This is an important figure in David's life, and we know that she's number one on his hit parade. She's the apple of his eye. She's the one that he really loves. This is the woman for him. This is his girl. This is his girl. And there she is at his deathbed, respecting him as if he's sitting upon his own throne. And he says, what would you? What would you? She waits until she hears those words, and then she says to him. Now, I want you to compare verse 17 with verse 13. So if you have your Bible there, we'll look at what Bath-Sheba says and compare it to what Nathan told her to say. Okay? You see that she was obedient to the word of the Lord as revealed by the prophet, go to David. She already knew what she was going to say, but Nathan sort of frames the language a little bit for her, and she uses that to her benefit. She makes this, what Nathan told her to say, she makes it her own because, and this is why Nathan went to her, only she knows how to speak to her husband. Wives, you're the only one who know how to speak to your husband. Oh, he might have friends and he might have advisors and he might have counselors aplenty, but he only has one wife. And she knows best how to speak to him. So what does he do? This is Nathan went to her. Nathan gave her the words, but I want you just to compare with me. Because notice that she doesn't use the interrogative when she goes in there. Nathan said, didst not thou, my lord, O king, swear unto thy handmaiden? So these are Nathan's words that he gives to Bath-Sheba. You're going to go to David and you're going to say, didn't you say? So it's a question. She doesn't say that. Notice what she says. Verse 17, my lord, you swear. See, she doesn't ask any questions. She doesn't have to ask any questions. David said, what do you want? That's her open door. And she walks right up to that bed, grabs his hand and said, honey, you said. She doesn't ask him a question. Don't I remember you said? No, wives don't ever ask you that. Wives don't ever say, didn't you say? No, you know what Denise says to me? She said, David Smith, you said. And I go, oh, okay. Because I trust this memory more than I do my own. And I'm sure that's the case for every man in here. You trust your wife's memory more than your own. And so she walks up to David, she grabs his poor hand, lying there on that bed, and she said, you said. She doesn't ask a question. But then notice how she changes. The whole thing is wonderfully changed. But what she says next, she said, my Lord, you swear by the Lord your God. Nathan didn't put that in her mouth. He said, you'll go in and you'll say to David, didn't you say, O my Lord, O King, didn't you swear unto your handmaiden, saying, surely? No. And this is the prophet. But she knows how best to talk to her husband. And so she walks there and she says, you swore by the Lord your God. And I'm sure David perked up on that pillow when he heard that. Because David's not going to break his oath. David's not going to break his oath to the Lord. That means more to David than all the gold and the silver in the city of Jerusalem, more than that palace that he's in, more than that bed he's lying on, more than all the women that he has had as wives, more than all the sons that he has as princes, more than all the battles that he has ever won. His devotion to the Lord means more, and she knew that. That's why Nathan went to her. Because he knew that this lady, Bath-Sheba, could speak to David like nobody else. And she does. She walks in and says, honey, you swear by the Lord your God that, and you swore to me that Solomon, my son, would reign after you. And I'm sure when she said those words, you swear by the Lord your God to me that Solomon would reign, David perked up. Because David, I'm sure David knew. Remember, David's dying, and he's thinking about the next door down, which is glory. He's not thinking about politics and all that. He's sick. But here comes his wife, and she stirs him up, and she stirs up not his anger, not his passion. She stirs up his devotion. Oh, that's wonderful. And you know what? Wives, hello, wives? You need to stir up your husband's devotion. There's a lot of stuff competing for your husband's attention. A lot of stuff. And some of it, ladies, is not very nice. There's a whole lot of wickedness out there. There's a whole lot of corruption out there that's vying for your husband's attention. You need to remind your husband of his devotion to the Lord. And it's his job to lead your family in that very devotion. And this is what Bath-Sheba does. She walks in there. She has the script from Nathan. She tosses it out because she knows what she has to say. She says, honey, you swear by the Lord your God unto me, saying, assuredly, Solomon thy son shall reign after me. And he shall sit upon my throne. And now behold, Adonijah reigneth. Now notice what Nathan says. He says, didst thou not, O my Lord, O King, swear unto thy handmaid, saying, assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. Why then, here's another interrogative, another question, why then doth Adonijah reign? No question when Bath-Sheba says it. She just says, looky here, Adonijah reigns. She just puts it in plain facts. And that's exactly what King David needed. He needed black and white. He didn't need somebody coming in and manipulate with questions. He needed his wife to come in and say, hey, I love you, but listen up. You made a promise to the Lord, and that promise was to me, that Solomon would sit on your throne. And now Adonijah reigns. Hello? That is why Nathan went to her, because that's what she alone could do. She waited on the Lord. She showed respect to her husband, and then she waited for her husband to respond. And when he did, then she came in and she said to him what only a wife could say. Thank God for wives and for moms who have the courage to say exactly what is needed. And she did it because, and she could do it because she waited. That very first thing is going to haunt us for the entirety of this story. It's going to haunt us from the beginning to the end. This waiting thing. It made the way for Nathan to come in. It made the way for her to walk into David's sick bed room. It made the way for her to speak to her husband like only she could speak to her husband. Waiting was the key. All right. And then notice that she adds information here that Nathan didn't tell her to say the rest of this. Notice what she says. There in verse 18. Why then, she says in 18, now behold, Adonijah reigneth, and now my lord the king knoweth it not. Now, Nathan said that to her at the very beginning of verse 11. Remember that? He walked in and he said, haven't you heard? Adonijah reigns, and David doesn't know it. Yeah, she knew David didn't know it. And she goes in and tells David, here's something you don't know. He said, you know, O Lord King, you don't know that Adonijah reigns. Again, something that only a wife could say. And this is information that she knew. This wasn't told to her by Nathan the prophet. She knew it already. She has this information, which tells us she's more tuned in than we knew. Mothers always are. This information is delivered in a way that only a wife and a mother could communicate. I'll never forget when I gave my life to full-time Christian ministry. I was a 17-year-old boy. I was wet behind the ears, just been born again. It was March 1978, and they had a big revival at the church that I was attending that was a part of the school where I was going to school. It was a Baptist school, and the church, the big Baptist church, was having this huge revival, and they had a huge, monstrous crowd, and that night, and I didn't even know they were going to do this, they gave an altar call for anyone who felt led to full-time Christian service. And I went down at that meeting because I felt the Lord's hand on me. And I said, I've got to go. I cannot go and not declare my intention to serve the Lord. And guess who was in the audience that night? I never told my mom I was going there. I never told her my intention. I didn't know that they were going to give that altar call. I didn't know any of that. But my mom told me years later, she said, I went because the Lord told me that something important was going to happen to you that night. That's that's how tuned in mothers are to their families. My mom knew. Yeah. And this lady knows. She knows that David doesn't know it. David's busy dying. David's thinking about that next step. And then verse 19. And he hath slain oxen and fat cattle and sheep in abundance, and hath called all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab the captain of the host. See, did Nathan tell her that? No. She knew what was going on. She very tuned in. And then here's the trump card, what she says next. And David knew what this meant. But Solomon thy servant hath he not called. Why call all the king's sons except for Solomon? Because Adonijah knew that Solomon was David's choice. He wasn't going to call him. Because Solomon, not too many days in the future, was going to be found dead. He wasn't going to call Solomon to come say, God save the king, when Solomon knew that David had said and sworn by the Lord to his mother that he would sit on his throne. Adonijah wasn't going to do that. So she holds this one out to the very last. Solomon thy servant hath he not called. And I'm sure that David really straightened up. He got a little backbone. And he must have sat up on that bed when she said that. And then, notice what she says. She seeks the best for her family here. And again, all of this is created because this lady waited. Very first thing, she waited, and she showed respect, and then she waited on her husband, and then she spoke like only a mom or a wife could speak, and she understood all that was happening. But now notice what happens here. She defends her children, and she does something for her husband that only a wife could do. You'll notice the reason that Solomon will not be called. Adonijah knows he's the appointed king. Since the oath was made in the Lord's name, and since Solomon is not threatened by David's inability to act here, Adonijah is going to act. And she comes in there and she says to her husband in verse 20, Thou, my Lord, O king, the eyes of all Israel are upon thee. All Israel are upon thee. You know what a good wife does? Or a good mom does? She makes her husband and her family better. That's what she does. And that's exactly what she does. She reminds everybody in that room, including David. And David's the object here. He's the one being spoken to. But she reminds them. She reminds this man, her husband. Now he can be king, and she calls him king and bows to him and calls him Lord. This is her husband. This is her boy. This is her man. And she speaks to him that way. And she says to him, everybody is looking at you. And notice that all the eyes of Israel. That's a real good translation the king gives us here. The eyes of all Israel. So every eye in Israel is looking to David and waiting. Just like she had been waiting. They're all waiting to hear what David will have to say about who's going to replace thee. All the eyes of Israel are upon thee. She reminds him of his responsibility to the nation, that they are upon David, these eyes, because it is his choice that everyone is waiting to hear. They're not waiting to hear what Joab has to say, and they're not waiting to hear what Abiathar has to say, and they're not waiting to hear what all the king's sons have to say, and they're not waiting to hear what anybody else has to say. They're waiting to hear what David has to say. And this wife walks into his sick room, and she says to him, everybody is waiting for you. Could you help us out? She is the only one that could say that to him. And thank God this woman had the strength and the courage to say that to her husband. She reminds him of his responsibility. A good wife makes her husband better. She reminds him of his responsibility to the nation, and then she reminds him of his responsibility to the family, her son, by this man. She says to him,